Hello, I'm Sharice Hawkins, and I want to welcome you to this innovation talk. Woohoo! I have to admit something, though. Before we get started, I decided to actually change the name for this presentation. It was Drive Innovation, Traits, Talents, and Tools, and I decided that it would be much more appropriate to call it Faceplants, Word Problems, and Little Red Riding Hood. Now, I assure you that we're going to get to the same conclusion as the original title, but probably in a lot more of a fun way. This is the goal of the presentation, to let you know that innovation is not magic. It's really knowledge, skills, and practice. And I have to admit that I didn't always believe this, even though I was involved with some very innovative projects and I'd seen it in action. But it's true, and I'm here to help you make your life a little bit more innovative. One of the things I think is a problem is that we think about innovation often as complexity and maybe confuse the two. This is actually a picture of the Guinness World Book Record Rube Goldberg machine. And it is definitely very innovative, but it's also incredibly complex. It's also a very fun YouTube video if you get a chance to look at it. But the point is, innovation doesn't have to be complex. And there are some simple things that you can do to bring innovation into your life. You might be wondering, who is this woman and why is she talking to you about innovation? You can tell from my bio that I'm the CEO of a software company based in Boulder, Colorado, that I chose to major in engineering in college, and early in my career I was actually a Walt Disney Imagineer. But those facts only tell you that I'm a technologist. They have very little to do with innovation and what took me on an innovative journey. So how are we going to actually learn more about innovation? I thought it would be fun to have a quiz. 4 questions, true, false, no drama. So here are the 4 questions, and we'll be walking through these to learn a little bit more about innovation. The first one is, does innovation require understanding about how to fail? True or false? I believe the answer is true. Because when we are really innovating and we're taking risks, failure is an option, and it can often happen. One of the things that is interesting is that as a culture, we are often afraid or concerned about things that don't go as planned. And it's important to be able to understand how to handle those situations. Another part of our corporate culture is often some things that are conflicting. The idea of having a success attitude, where we're rewarded for things going right, setting lofty goals and achieving them, doing really hard problems well, and the mantra of take more risks. Those can actually be in conflict with each other. How can you have a successful attitude and take more risks at the same time? So these are some of the things that we actually grapple with. What we notice about the taking more risk mantra versus the striving for success. And I'm not saying success and a successful attitude isn't important. Setting those goals and improving year over year are all things that as a business owner I take very seriously. But when we only reward successful outcomes, you're really making sure that people take small steps versus leaps. They're more likely to only attempt something that they have a pretty good idea that they're going to be successful at. And taking those small steps versus leaps actually means that you're settling for mediocrity. It means the death of innovation. So you have to be careful what sort of messages that you're giving to your organizations. Here is an example of a failure, a faceplant, whether it's literally or metaphorically. And there's really only one thing that you can do when success doesn't happen or failure occurs if you want to create that innovative mindset. There's one question that you should ask yourself and ask the people that took part in this. Well, aside from, are you okay, if there's any harm has been done. That question is, tell me a story. Tell me a story about what you learned from that experience, what you learned from things not going well, or that potential failure. When you create a culture of asking that question on a regular basis, then you create an environment where people can be encouraged to take those risks, know that if they aren't successful, there won't be criticism or stigma, and they can go ahead and take that risk the next time. That's really the environment that allows innovation to occur. There's another thing that you should remember. When it happens to you, when you look in the mirror and something didn't go as planned, or you had a proverbial faceplant, you need to ask yourself that question. what have I learned? Make that be the first question that you ask yourself, and put aside, again, the criticism and the stigma that might come associated with not getting exactly to the point that you wanted to. Let's go to our second question. Practicing math problems improves innovative thinking. Now, you remember, I'm an engineer. I love math problems. But I'm here to tell you today that I believe that this is false, particularly when I looked at how my daughter was learning in school and what happens in the math environment today. And here's why. Math problems teach you to solve problems efficiently as possible, under time pressure, usually with a lot of constraints. Here's an example of a word problem, the classic word problem. There are 51 words. There's 5 pieces of data. We know the name of the word problem protagonist. Our brains find this irresistible. We know that if we work hard, we're going to be able to get the right answer. In fact, if I hadn't changed the slide, most of you would quit listening to me and try and start solving that problem. That's how irresistible solving problems can be for us and what our brains like to do. Some of you right now might even be checking the right answer. But what word problems and math teach us, again, is how to solve a problem within certain constraints. And that can be in conflict with what happens when you really have to have an innovative mindset. In an innovative mindset, you have to be comfortable with ambiguity. The box and the problem set is not defined by 51 words and 5 numbers. Being comfortable with ambiguity can be difficult, and you have to push back on the needs, on the desire to not be comfortable with that. And one of the things that we notice around innovative thinking is that innovators recognize and then they challenge key assumptions. This can also be really difficult, but it is possible to hone those skills with more and more practice. I mentioned before that I worked at Disney for early in my career, and one of the things that I found interesting about that process was the way we decided to solve problems. I remember one particular project that we worked on seemed like it had an impossible outcome. We had to have a ceiling that would collapse and rebuild itself over and over and over again in one of the rides. So we knew what had to happen, but we didn't have direction on how that needed to happen. So as our project team worked, we tried numerous things to achieve this outcome, to create that illusion for the guests. One of the things that was really important is, guess what? The first thing that we tried didn't work. The 15th thing that we tried didn't work. But there was, again, no criticism and no stigma associated with that. We simply moved on, no one lost their jobs, and we eventually figured out how to solve that problem. One of the best parts about being here at Salesforce and Dreamforce is all of the tools that are available to all of you at your fingertips. We've got user experience tools. We've got ways to gather and analyze data. There are forms that we can use. And we just heard yesterday about connecting with Google and Google Analytics. There's never been a better time to be able to create with the Salesforce tools and go from an idea to a working product as quickly as possible. So it is a delight to be a part of the Salesforce ecosystem and look at all of the new changes that are available to all of us. Now, let's move on to the next question. The best innovation comes from asking customers what they want. This is kind of a sticky one. True or false? How many people think this is true? Show of hands. All right. In my personal opinion, I think that this is, again, false. We know that the customer is always right, and we're often told to listen to the customer and what their perspective is, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. I would challenge you to think about this in a different way, however, that customers come up with great incremental features. So when you listen to them and you hear what they want, they're going to tell you how you can improve what you already have, more likely than not. When you look at a customer in their natural habitat and you actually see how they're using the product, not what they told you they're doing or what they remember doing, but how they're actually using the product, some really interesting things can come to the forefront. For example, if I asked you what's the best way to hang a heavy mirror on a wall, you would likely come up with something like a hammer and a nail and maybe some wire. If I asked instead, and if I watched you try and hang a mirror, you would reach for those same tools. if I asked instead, how do you hang a very heavy object on a vertical surface and make sure that after you want to take that object down, the work that you have to do is minimized, you might come up with a different solution, one that looks like this, the command strip. So one of the things that's very interesting about the command strip is that it was developed by 3M. 3M is an incredibly innovative company, even though they've been around for a very, very long time. They implemented the 15% policy. I don't know if how many of you have heard about that, but it allows employees to spend 15% of their time working on something that's not directly related to their day-to-day responsibility. They can create, they can be innovative, they can explore new areas. They began this process in 1948. And because of that, they attribute over 22,000 patents to being able to have this 15% process. A very interesting study in what innovation can do over the long haul. Here's another example around asking customers what they want. If you had to measure liquid and make sure that you didn't spill any of that through the laundry detergent washing process, it was actually a pretty large problem. When Procter & Gamble went and watched people use liquid laundry detergent, they found out that the cap would go on top of the bottle, and it would spill all around the outside. You have to reach for some sort of towel and wipe. It was a big mess. So this is the actual picture from the patent that they filed for an innovative container where you can measure in the cup, you put it on top of the bottle, and all of the excess falls inside. No waste, no muss, no fuss. It was brilliant. But I seriously doubt that a consumer would have come up with the idea. It was by watching what the consumer did and what their frustration point that this solution came to bear. The last one I'll talk about in terms of this particular question is, well, I'm a huge French fry fan, so I had to put ketchup into this presentation. Heinz has been really innovative from the very beginning. There are glass bottles that were shaped differently so that they could distinguish their product, to single-serving ketchup packets, which makes driving through and getting French fries much nicer experience, to thinking about what happens when you actually turn a product upside down. That's not something that people do on a daily basis, but it's made a huge difference in the area of condiments. Now, we're now down to our last question, and that is, you can't practice innovation, it's a mindset. Is this true or false? Do you wake up or are you born with this innovation mindset, or can it be something that you can cultivate and practice? True or false? Well, I'm sure you know the answer to this after having listened to my presentation, but I wholeheartedly believe that it's false, that you can practice innovation, and it's not something that you have to be born with. And to illustrate that, we're going to do an experiment. It's one that I did with a much smaller group, so it'll be interesting to see how it bears out with this large of an audience. But I've also created some giveaways. One of the things that I noticed is that by practicing innovation every day and doing something small on a daily basis to really get your brain involved in that innovative process, you can actually improve your innovation skills. So I consider this the mini innovation toolkit. There's, 10 or 11 ideas of what you can do on a daily basis. And I'll be giving these away to people who want to share some of their innovation ideas through this exercise. And yes, this is where Little Red Riding Hood comes in, as promised. So this innovation exercise is really looking at the character in the stories, then looking at what key assumptions we make about this particular fairy tale, and what key constraints there are associated with that, and what happens when those constraints and those key assumptions are eliminated. We all know the story of Little Red Riding Hood. She's a young girl who travels through the forest with food to give her sick grandmother. They end up being tormented by the big bad wolf before a woodsman comes to the rescue. Pretty straightforward. It's a word problem. We have all the constraints. Now what we're going to do next is I need you all to have either a phone, a place to take notes, pencil and paper. We're going to do 3 10-second exercises to get your innovation juices flowing. So what we'll do is look at each of the characters and then take 10 seconds to look at key assumptions and key constraints. So here are the characters: Little Red Riding Hood, whose goal is to cheer up her sick grandmother; the wolf, who's really only interested in feeding his stomach; sick grandmother who wants to feel better and also see her grandchild, and the woodsman who's interested in overall forest safety. So in the next 10 seconds, you'll pick one character, and you'll write down 3 assumptions that you have about that character. And this is what we can do in real life when we're looking at our customers and our clients. What are the assumptions that we're making about them? Which one of those are true? And what happens if we want to eliminate those assumptions? So when I say go, write down 3 key assumptions. And then when we share some of those, you'll be able to take home an innovation kit. Ready? Go. Time. Okay. Thank you. And stop. The next 10-second exercise is similar, but it's around constraints. What constraints can we identify in this story, and what are some of the solutions that we can have if we remove those constraints? So again, I'd like you to pick one character. It could be the same character or a different one. What are some key constraints around that particular character that we can examine? Some examples of the constraints might be that Little Red Riding Hood has to walk to the forest, or that the sick grandmother has no internet connection. You can be as creative as you want, but let's just take 10 seconds and write down 3 constraints and see what happens. Ready, set, go. All right. Now, the last one, and it'd be great if we could do this with, like I said, a smaller team or some group think, but we'll take those particular constraints and assumptions, take another 10 seconds, and pick one constraint and one assumption that you'll just throw out. When you throw that assumption out, what sort of solutions come forward as an option of a product or service that you could sell that particular character? So again, we'll take 10 seconds, throw out at least one of the assumptions and one constraint for the character, and see what sort of innovation solution you come up with. Ready? Go. Three, 2, 1. All right. So let's see what we came up with. Did anyone consider Little Red Riding Hood and constraints and assumptions about Little Red Riding Hood that they would like to share in exchange for a colorful innovation toolkit? Some technical difficulty, but there you go.
Okay, so I picked red, and it was basically how she's going to cheer up her granny and how she's going to get stuff to her. So I figured I'd get her a drone.
Yes!
And she can just, video chat with grandma through the drone and
Excellent.
drop off some food.
Excellent idea. You get your pick of colors. Oh, we'll go for red. Anyone else have a story they'd like to share about removing an innovation, removing an assumption and constraint, and coming up with a creative solution for one of these characters? Anyone? No one decided to choose the wolf. The wolf is really actually a very challenging one. Hey, we have someone right here. All right, I'm gonna have to take these home to the team. If you are shy about sharing in public, then feel free to come talk to me afterwards. I'd be happy to hand these out. So, in preparing for this presentation,
Wait, we gotta go back.
we have another one.
Yeah, you want to share? He's like,
Let's hear it.
I want your stuff.
Well, the wolves travel in packs, so the guy is traveling alone. So he needs some friends. That's his constraint. He needs to go work with other wolves to get the Little Red Riding Hood.
Yes.
Next thing is he needs to learn how to hunt bigger prey than just small prey. And I came up with something else for Grandma, but I don't know if that's helpful or not. Grandma needs guns to get wolves there.
Thank you. One of the participants said, we need a taser for the woodsman so that there's less mess in Grandma's house when they get rid of the wolf. All right, definitely one for you as well. Anyone else before we wrap up and I can talk about some resources? We would love to hear any creative ideas that you guys have. Going once? All right. Well, thanks for playing along. And again, if you were too shy, feel free to come up and talk with me afterwards. There's some really fun daily activities that I'd be happy to share with you. So here are some resources that I thought were particularly helpful in looking at innovation. 3 of them are books: The Little Black Book of Innovation, The Icarus Deception by Seth Godin, and How We Got to Now. They all cover innovation in different perspectives. Sometimes it's around tools that we can do on an individual basis. One of them is stories about major innovations and how they've affected society. But all 3 of them are quick, short, really good reads that I highly recommend. The 3 badges at the bottom are innovation badges in Trailhead. Trailhead is an amazing wealth of information, as you already know. And I was surprised to see how many kind of philosophical approaches there were on the Trailhead, not just technical content. And there's some amazing content there around innovation, how to look at innovation, how to drive innovation in your organization. So I want to make sure that I provided those resources to you as well. So here are the main takeaways from Face Plants, Word Problems, and Little Red Riding Hood. Recognizing and then challenging those assumptions in your business and with your products is important. Experiment with removing constraints and seeing what kind of solutions come to bear when you take that approach. Practicing innovation is something that you can do on a daily basis very quickly, easily, and inexpensively. And some things I didn't touch on but are also really important to remember is that quantity leads to quality in terms of innovative ideas. When I mentioned that Disney story, there was a lot of different ideas that came to play before we came up with the right solution. And finally, we didn't have an opportunity to collaborate here today in this venue, but being able to talk to other people in your organization also is a really great way to drive more innovation, and it's much more effective than if you're thinking about this solo in your own head. I appreciate your time today. I hope you have a great Dreamforce.